In a city where skyscrapers gleamed under the weight of ambition, there was a restaurant called Lumière, a place where the elite gathered to flaunt their wealth and status. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables draped in silk, and the air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of self-important voices. It was a place where appearances were everything, where a single glance could measure a person's worth, or so the patrons thought. Into this world stepped a woman named Eleanor. She was older perhaps, in her late 50s, with silver streaks threading through her neatly pinned hair. Her dress was simple, a navy cardigan over a plain blouse, and her shoes, though polished, bore the faint scuffs of time. In her hand she clutched a worn leather purse, its edges frayed from years of use. To the glittering crowd she was invisible, a shadow passing through their world of excess. "Just another nobody," they whispered, their eyes sliding past her as she approached the hostess stand. Eleanor's voice was soft but clear as she requested a table. The hostess, a young woman with a practiced smile and a designer dress, raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "but we're fully booked for VIPs tonight. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the diner down the street." The words were polite, but the smirk on her face was anything but. A few nearby patrons chuckled, their laughter sharp like broken glass. Eleanor didn't flinch. She only nodded, her expression calm, almost serene. "I understand," she said, her voice steady, "but I'd like to stay. I'll wait for a table." The hostess rolled her eyes, gesturing toward a small, cramped corner near the kitchen doors. "Suit yourself," she muttered, already turning to greet a man in a tailored suit who breezed past Eleanor as if she were part of the furniture. As Eleanor sat, the room continued its dance of arrogance. A group of young tech entrepreneurs at a nearby table, their voices loud with self-assurance, noticed her. "Look at her," one of them sneered, a man with slicked back hair and a Rolex glinting on his wrist. "What's she doing here? Did she wander in from a thrift store?" His companions laughed, their voices carrying across the room. "Maybe she's lost another," added a woman in a sequined dress, her lips curling. "Someone should tell her this isn't a soup kitchen." Eleanor heard every word, but her face betrayed nothing. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. To the casual observer, she was just a simple woman out of place in this den of opulence. But there was something in her posture, in the way her fingers rested lightly on her purse, that hinted at a story untold. A waiter passing by paused, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "Strange," he murmured to himself, noticing the subtle elegance in her movements, the way she carried herself with a dignity that didn't match her modest appearance. "She doesn't belong here. Or does she?" The mockery continued. The tech entrepreneurs, emboldened by their champagne, grew louder. "Hey, Grandma," the man with the Rolex called out, his voice cutting through the hum of the restaurant. "Why don't you do us a favor and serve us some drinks? You look like you'd fit right in with the staff." The table erupted in laughter, and even the hostess smirked from her podium. Eleanor turned her head slightly, meeting the man's gaze. Her eyes were calm, almost pitying, but she said nothing. Instead, she offered a faint smile, the kind that made the air feel heavier, as if she knew something they didn't. The tension in the room was palpable, though most didn't notice it. A few patrons, those with keener instincts, sensed something amiss. A woman at a nearby table, a journalist with a knack for spotting stories, narrowed her eyes. "That purse," she whispered to her companion, "it's vintage Hermes, not the kind you find in a thrift store." Her companion shrugged, but the journalist's curiosity was piqued. She watched as Eleanor sat unperturbed while the world around her judged and jeered. They had no idea who she was. They saw only a simple woman, a nobody in a room full of somebodies. But Eleanor was no stranger to being underestimated. She had walked through rooms like this before, her presence dismissed, her worth ignored. And yet she carried herself with a quiet strength, as if she knew the truth would unfold in its own time. The restaurant buzzed on, oblivious to the storm brewing in the corner, where Eleanor sat waiting patiently for her moment. As the night wore on, the hostility grew bolder. The tech entrepreneurs, now deep in their drinks, decided to escalate their game. "Let's have some fun," the man with the Rolex said, his eyes glinting with malice. He waved over the manager, a stern-faced man in a crisp suit. "That woman," he said, pointing at Eleanor, "she's ruining the vibe. Why don't you give her something to do? Maybe she can clear our plates." The manager hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. There was something about her, something he couldn't place, but the pressure of the room, the weight of wealth and influence pushed him forward. He approached her table, his voice firm, but polite. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we need this space. If you'd like to stay, perhaps you could assist the staff tonight. We're short-handed." It was a humiliating request designed to drive her out. The room watched expectant, waiting for her to crumble. But Eleanor only looked up, her eyes meeting the manager's. "If that's what it takes," she said softly, "I'll help." The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted in whispers. "She's actually doing it," someone muttered. "Pathetic," another scoffed. But Eleanor stood smoothing her cardigan and followed the manager to the kitchen. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. The kitchen doors swung shut behind Eleanor, and the noise of the dining room faded into a dull hum. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of clattering pans and shouted orders, a stark contrast to the polished elegance outside. Eleanor stood there, her cardigan slightly out of place among the starched white uniforms of the staff. The manager handed her an apron, his expression a mix of discomfort and impatience. "Just clear the plates from table 12, he said, avoiding her gaze. "And try not to get in the way." Eleanor tied the apron around her waist with deliberate care, her movements slow and precise. The staff watched her, some with pity, others with amusement. "Who's the old lady?" a young waiter whispered, snickering. "Probably some charity case," another replied. But Eleanor paid them no mind. She picked up a tray and stepped back into the dining room, her head held high, as if she were carrying not dirty dishes but a crown. Table 12 was where the tech entrepreneurs sat, their laughter louder, now fueled by wine and their own sense of superiority. As Eleanor approached, the man with the Rolex leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Well, look at this," he said, his voice carrying. "Grandma's playing waitress. Let's see how she does." His companions smirked, their phones already out, ready to capture her humiliation for their social media feeds. "Don't drop anything, sweetheart," the woman in the sequined dress called out, her tone mocking. Eleanor said nothing. She moved with a quiet grace, stacking plates with a steadiness that belied her age. Her hands, though lined with years, were deft and sure, as if they had performed tasks far more complex than this. The journalist at the nearby table watched, her pen hovering over her notebook. "There's something about her," she murmured to herself, noticing the way Eleanor's fingers moved, the faint calluses on her knuckles, marks of someone who had worked with precision, perhaps at a keyboard or a machine. The entrepreneurs weren't done. "Hey, waitress," the Rolex man called, snapping his fingers. "We're out of wine. Fetch us another bottle, and make it quick." The room tittered, and the manager standing by the hostess stand shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Eleanor paused, her tray balanced perfectly. She turned to the man, her eyes meeting his with that same calm, unreadable gaze. "Of course," she said softly, and disappeared back into the kitchen. The crowd's laughter followed her, but not everyone was amused. A young waiter, barely out of his teens, watched from the sidelines, his brow furrowed. "This isn't right," he muttered to a colleague. "She doesn't look like she belongs in an apron." His colleague shrugged. "She agreed to it, didn't she? Let her play along." But the young waiter couldn't shake the feeling that they were all missing something crucial. When Eleanor returned with the wine, she poured it with a precision that silenced the table for a moment. The way she held the bottle, the way she tilted the glass, it was almost ceremonial, as if she were performing a ritual. The Rolex man blinked momentarily, thrown, but quickly recovered. "Not bad for a newbie," he said, though his tone lacked its earlier venom. His companions, however, were relentless. "Let's give her a real test," the sequined woman said, her eyes gleaming. "Hey, waitress, why don't you take our order? Let's see if you can keep up with a place like this." The manager, now hovering nearby, nodded reluctantly. "Go ahead," he said to Eleanor, his voice low. "Take their order." It was another trap, another chance to humiliate her. The menu at Lumière was notoriously complex, filled with French terms and obscure dishes that even seasoned servers struggled to memorize. The entrepreneurs leaned forward, eager to see her falter. Eleanor took a small notepad from the apron pocket and looked at the group. "What would you like?" she asked, her voice as steady as ever. The Rolex man grinned, rattling off a list of dishes with deliberate speed, throwing in pronunciation errors to trip her up. "And make sure it's quick," he added. "We don't have all night." Eleanor wrote without hesitation, her pen moving swiftly across the page. When she finished, she repeated the order back to them word for word, her pronunciation flawless. The table fell silent, their smirks fading. "That's correct?" the Rolex man muttered, glancing at his companions. The journalist's pen scratched furiously, now her eyes wide. "Who is she?" she whispered, her instincts screaming that this was no ordinary woman. But the entrepreneurs weren't ready to back down. "Let's raise the stakes," the sequined woman said, her voice sharp. She turned to the manager. "Why don't you let her serve the VIP table, the one with the tech conference organizers? If she can handle that, maybe she's not as useless as she looks." The manager hesitated, but the pressure of the room, the weight of their influence pushed him to agree. The VIP table was the centerpiece of the restaurant where the most powerful figures of the tech world sat discussing deals that could reshape industries. Serving it required not just skill, but an understanding of protocol, of the unspoken rules that governed their world. The entrepreneurs smirked, certain Eleanor would crumble under the scrutiny. Eleanor, however, didn't falter. She approached the VIP table with the same quiet confidence, her tray steady, her movements precise. The tech moguls barely noticed her at first, too absorbed in their conversation. But as she served one of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for spotting talent, paused. "Your hands," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chatter. "They're not the hands of a waitress." Eleanor smiled faintly, placing a glass of wine on the table. "They've done many things," she said softly before stepping back. The woman's gaze followed her, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. They had no idea who she was, but the seeds of doubt were growing, spreading through the room like ripples on a still pond. The VIP table was the heart of Lumière that night, a gathering of tech titans whose names graced the covers of magazines and the headlines of industry news. They spoke in low, urgent tones, debating algorithms, acquisitions, and the future of artificial intelligence. Serving them was no small task. It required finesse, discretion, and an almost telepathic understanding of their needs. The entrepreneurs at table 12 watched eagerly, their phones still raised, waiting for Eleanor to stumble. But Eleanor didn't stumble. She moved among the VIPs with an ease that seemed almost choreographed, placing plates with surgical precision, refilling glasses, without interrupting the flow of conversation. Her presence was unobtrusive, yet commanding, like a conductor guiding an orchestra. The tech moguls, initially oblivious, began to notice her. One of them, a man with silver hair and a reputation for ruthlessness, paused mid-sentence. "Who is this woman?" he asked, his voice low but curious. The woman who had commented on Eleanor's hands leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I've seen her before," she murmured. "Somewhere important." The entrepreneurs, sensing their plan unraveling, grew restless. "She's just lucky," the Rolex man muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. The sequined woman scowled, unwilling to let go of their game. "Let's make it harder," she said, waving the manager over again. "Tell her to answer a question from the VIPs, something technical. Let's see how she handles that." The manager, now visibly uneasy, approached Eleanor as she cleared a plate from the VIP table. "Ma'am," he said, his voice strained, "one of the guests has a question for you. It's about the tech industry. They'd like you to answer." It was an absurd request, a final attempt to expose her as an outsider. The room grew quiet, all eyes on Eleanor. The tech moguls turned intrigued, sensing a shift in the air. Eleanor set the plate down and looked at the manager, then at the VIP table. "I'd be happy to," she said, her voice as calm as ever. The woman who had recognized her hands spoke up, her tone sharp but curious. "Tell me," she said, "what's your take on quantum computing's impact on encryption? It's a hot topic tonight." It was a question designed to stump even seasoned professionals, a trap wrapped in jargon. The room held its breath. The entrepreneurs smirked, certain she would falter. But Eleanor didn't hesitate. She straightened her eyes, meeting the woman's with a quiet intensity. "Quantum computing," she began, her voice clear and steady, "poses both a threat and an opportunity for encryption. Its ability to factor large numbers exponentially faster than classical computers could render current asymmetric algorithms like RSA obsolete. But it also opens the door to quantum-resistant cryptography, lattice-based systems, for example, which are already being standardized by NIST. The challenge is implementation at scale, balancing security with computational efficiency." The room fell silent. The tech moguls stared, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock. The woman who asked the question leaned back, her lips parting slightly. "That's exactly right," she said, almost to herself. The silver-haired man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Where did you study?" he asked, his voice tinged with respect. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I've learned a few things over the years," she said, and returned to her tray. The entrepreneurs at table 12 were speechless. their phones lowering as their smirks vanished. The journalist's pen flew across her notebook, her heart racing. "She's no waitress," she whispered, her mind piecing together the puzzle. The young waiter watching from the sidelines felt a surge of vindication. "I knew it," he muttered, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. But the moment of truth was yet to come. As Eleanor moved to clear another plate, the restaurant doors swung open and a man stepped inside. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with an air of authority that commanded attention. Behind him followed two security guards, their presence subtle but unmistakable. The room turned, whispers rippling through the crowd. The man scanned the room, his gaze settling on Eleanor. A faint smile crossed his face as he strode toward her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm but resonant, carrying across the room. "I'm sorry I'm late. Everything all right?" The room froze. The tech moguls stood, recognizing him instantly. The journalist's pen stopped, her jaw dropping. The entrepreneurs at table 12 paled, their bravado evaporating. The man was Jonathan Vale, a billionaire tech magnate, founder of one of the world's most powerful AI companies, and as the room would soon learn, Eleanor's husband. Eleanor turned to him, her smile serene. "Everything's fine, Jonathan," she said softly. "Just helping out." She untied her apron and handed it to the stunned manager, who stood frozen, clutching it like a lifeline. Jonathan's eyes swept the room, landing on the entrepreneur's table. "I hear you've been giving my wife a hard time," he said, his voice cold but controlled. "Care to explain?" The Rolex man stammered, his face flushed. We didn't know," he managed, his voice barely audible. The sequined woman shrank in her seat, her confidence gone. Jonathan turned to the manager, his expression hardening. "You let this happen," he said. "You're done here." The manager's face drained of color, and he nodded, unable to speak. The tech moguls approached, their demeanor now deferential. "Mrs. Vale," the silver-haired man said, his voice respectful. "We had no idea. Your work in quantum algorithms. It's legendary." The woman who asked the question stepped forward, her eyes wide. "You're Dr. Eleanor Vale," she said, almost in awe. "The pioneer of post-quantum cryptography. I studied your papers at MIT. The room erupted in whispers, then applause. The journalist scribbled furiously, already drafting her headline. The young waiter clapped, his face beaming with pride. Eleanor, however, remained calm, her dignity unshaken. She took Jonathan's arm, and together they walked toward the door, the crowd parting before them. They had no idea who she was, but now they would never forget. The restaurant fell silent as Eleanor and Jonathan disappeared through the doors, their figures vanishing into the city's glow. The chandeliers still sparkled, the champagne still bubbled, but the air felt different now, heavier with the weight of what had just unfolded. The tech entrepreneurs at table 12 sat frozen, their phones forgotten on the table, their faces a mix of shame and disbelief. The manager, still clutching the apron Eleanor had handed him, stumbled toward the kitchen, his career in ruins. The VIPs returned to their seats, their conversation subdued, their respect for the waitress now etched in their minds. The journalist remained at her table, her notebook filled with furious scribbles. She knew she had witnessed something extraordinary, a story that would resonate far beyond the walls of Lumière. "Dr. Eleanor Vale," she murmured, circling the name. The woman they mocked was a titan. She began drafting her article, her words fueled by a sense of justice, a need to tell the world about the quiet strength of a woman who had turned humiliation into triumph. The young waiter, still standing by the kitchen doors, felt a lump in his throat. He had watched it all unfold, had seen the cruelty and the redemption, and it changed something in him. "She didn't need to prove anything," he said to a colleague, his voice soft. "But she did, and they'll never forget it." His colleague nodded, her eyes distant. "Makes you wonder," she said, "how many people we pass by every day, not knowing who they really are." The patrons began to leave, their voices quieter now, their laughter replaced by introspection. A young woman dining with her mother turned to her as they stepped outside. "Mom," she said, her voice earnest, "why did they treat her like that? She was just being herself." Her mother sighed, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Because people see what they want to see, sweetheart." But tonight they learned to look deeper. In the days that followed, the story spread. The journalist's article went viral, shared across social media platforms, its headline bold and unyielding. The waitress they mocked was a tech titan. Commenters praised Eleanor's grace, her resilience, her refusal to stoop to the level of her tormentors. "This is what strength looks like," one wrote. She didn't need to shout her worth, she lived it. Others reflected on their own biases, vowing to judge less hastily, to see beyond appearances. Lumiere's reputation took a hit. The restaurant issued a public apology, but the damage was done. Patrons began to question the culture of exclusivity that had allowed such cruelty to flourish. The tech entrepreneurs, once so proud, faced backlash online, their names tied to the story of their arrogance. The Rolex man deleted his social media accounts, unable to escape the scrutiny. The sequined woman issued a half-hearted apology, but it rang hollow, drowned out by the public's demand for accountability. Eleanor, however, remained above it all. She returned to her work, her quiet life with Jonathan, her days filled with research and innovation. She didn't speak of the incident, didn't seek the spotlight. To her, it was just another moment, another test she had passed with the same dignity that had carried her through a lifetime of challenges. Her legacy, her contributions to technology spoke louder than any headline ever could. The lesson lingered not just in Lumière, but in the hearts of those who heard the story. It was a reminder that worth isn't measured by wealth or status, that a simple woman in a frayed cardigan could hold more power than a room full of elites. It was a call to look closer, to listen, to recognize the quiet strength that often goes unseen. And above all, it was a testament to the truth that Eleanor had lived so effortlessly. Pham Jia Kong Kanjuoch, Het Len No Chi Kanjuoch song. As the city moved on, its lights still blazing, its ambitions still soaring, the story of Eleanor Vale became a quiet anthem, a whisper that grew louder with each telling. You never know who you're standing beside, who you're passing in the street, who you're judging with a glance. Sometimes the most powerful among us are the ones who walk in silence, their worth shining through, not in what they say, but in what they do.